in Texas, outside of Dallas, in a suburb of Oak Cliff. And a lady still there, still has the house. It was a great big house, had about 10 rooms in it, and she rented those rooms out, and Lee Harvey Oswald actually rented one. It was not uncommon. People couldn't afford to rent houses. People didn't have houses to rent, but they rented rooms. Well, he rents this room in a boarding house. Well, as he's there, he falls in love with the daughter of the woman who owns the boarding house. And her name is? Who's writing on her? That's you, isn't it? Yeah, Rachel Donaldson Robards. She's the daughter of the woman who owned the boarding house. Now, according to history, Rachel Donaldson Robards was an attractive young lady, was very well educated, and she would really speak her own mind, which Jackson admired. Women didn't do that in those days. They were always kept everything in, that they weren't to speak out and show their feelings, especially to a male. But she was a little spunky, okay? He liked her. She was good looking in his mind. She was pretty. She was very well educated. She spoke her mind. He liked that. And they got themselves into a relationship. Now, if you look at her name, Rachel Donaldson Robards. What was her maiden name? Right. So she's a married woman that he's got a relationship going with. Okay? Did you know that, Brady, from your paper? So she's married. That's the problem. So the relationship between Jackson and Rachel Donaldson Robards becomes an issue because she's a married woman. Now, in her defense, she was in a very bad marriage, and her husband was very verbally abusive to her. Horrible man. But in those days, being married was different, so to speak. You know, you just didn't go out and get a divorce as easy. Okay, you were kind of told in your life that, you know, for better or for worse really means for better or for worse. And so you just stick with it. And this guy was an awful husband, very verbally abusive to her, treated her terrible. Well, like I mentioned, she realized that she had married the wrong man. However, in those days, you simply lived with that bad decision. That's what you did. Okay? So she got so miserable that she moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Spanish-owned Mississippi, and her husband did not go with her. She couldn't take it anymore around there, so she separated from her husband, moved from Nashville, Tennessee to Mississippi, which at the time was owned by the Spanish territory. But she had to get out of there, so she moves. So she moves from Nashville, Tennessee to Spanish-owned Mississippi and does not take her husband. Leilani, guess who was a frequent visitor to Mississippi? Andrew Jackson was. So despite the fact she was married, they continued their relationship. So Jackson was a frequent visitor to Mississippi. The relationship continues despite her marriage. And in 1791, claiming Rachel's husband had divorced her, Andrew and Rachel married. Okay, so in 1791, both claiming that Rachel's husband had divorced her, Andrew and Rachel got, look at me, married. Okay?
So it technically wasn't illegal.
Well, it was controversial because where they married in Spanish territory, and according to law, listen up, according to law, only a Catholic priest could legally marry a couple. That's how the rule was then. So they married in Spanish territory in Mississippi, and according to law, only a Catholic priest could legally marry a couple, and a Catholic priest did not perform this ceremony. Okay? Well, after their marriage, they moved back to Nashville, Tennessee, where Jackson purchased a small plantation which included 15 slaves. So after their, quote, marriage, the couple moved back to Nashville, Tennessee, where Jackson purchased a small plantation that included 15 slaves, which was not unusual at the time. I'm just making a point. And everything's hunky-dory until 1793. Yes, Madeira? 15. So everything's hunky-dory until 1793. And what happens, Ollie, in 1793? Think about it, the story. Come on. You could write a soap opera off this thing. Well, he already knew, but in 1793, the real husband, the first husband, claims publicly that he did not divorce her and accused her of the A word, which was really bad in those days, adultery. Accused her of adultery, which means you were fooling around with another man while you're married. So he waits till 1793, comes back into the picture, claims that I did not divorce Rachel, and I accuse her of adultery. That's a bad thing to be accused of. If you ever read The Scarlet Letter, didn't you read that in English? What happened when that lady committed adultery? Had to put an A on her front for adulteress, right? Okay, bad deal. Well, this guy wasn't real bright, because back in those days, a public claim of adultery against your spouse would make it legal divorce. If I accused my wife of adultery, that meant that we were divorced. Her punishment was going to be what? Living with the fact that she's adulterous and people called her bad names and that. Well, he did that, and then when he claimed adultery, according to law, they were officially divorced. So what'd they do? They married again. This time in a legal ceremony in Tennessee. So the first marriage was really kind of void. I mean, it wasn't legal. And she couldn't remarry if she wasn't divorced. And she really wasn't divorced, to be honest with you. But when the husband came back and claimed adultery, that freed her. And she had to live with the reputation, so to speak.
So he thought he was going to claim adultery and get her in trouble and really just divorce her?
Well, but the other hand, you know, nobody knows this character too much. My guess is that he wanted out of it too. He probably knew that. Okay? So they remarry, and they are legal now as they marry in Tennessee. Well, Jackson's life as a plantation owner didn't last too long. He got into politics. This is where he kind of got into politics, okay? But he had people to run his plantation, did he not? Yeah, he had slaves, and I mean, yeah, probably hired a foreman, but he had kept the plantation, but he decided to go into politics. So in 1796, at the age of just 29, he was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. First one ever from Tennessee. Why?
Population. Or because
Why is he the first one? It just got made a state. So he got appointed. They didn't elect him to the job. They just appointed him, and he was the first member of the House of Representatives from Tennessee ever. Because as Andrew said, it just got turned into a state. So in 1796, at the age of just 29, he was appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives, the first ever from Tennessee. Well, he served 1 year in the House, and then he went and served 1 year in the Senate, and then he returned back to the plantation. Serves 1 year in the House, 1 year in the Senate, heads back to Nashville. Why? Well, I'm not sure if he didn't like it. That's a good guess. According to historians, now you should write this down, he did not have a legislative personality. So one of the reasons why, or the reason why he came back to the plantation after 1 year in the House and 1 year in the Senate, is he didn't have, according to historians, a legislative personality. Now, you can write what you want to write. I'm going to kind of explain legislative personality. If you're in the legislature and politics, you got to play well with others. He wasn't very good at that. Okay, he wasn't good at playing well with others. And so, if you can believe this, I'm not sure if you have to write this down, but just kind of listen to the story. During the time he was in Congress, Congress was gonna give an official letter of thank you to George Washington for all he had done for the country. Jackson voted against that resolution. Okay? Why? Why would you vote against the most popular man getting a letter of thanks or a resolution of thanks? It was not politically the thing to do, was it? But he did it because he was a guy that did what he thought was right. He was upset at President Washington. You know what he was upset about? Comes back again. Had something to do with the British. Let's see if we can remember this. French were mad about it too, by the way. Yeah, Jay's Treaty. He was still steaming over Jay's Treaty. He didn't like the British, right? Hated the British. And here Washington, to keep out of war, remember, signed Jay's Treaty and for a promise of not invading us. They got a trap in the western lands and all that business. Well, Jackson thought that was a bunch of BS. So he wasn't voting for any. He didn't think he was going to thank Washington. The guy was too pro-British, and he hated the British. Okay? Well, that wasn't the thing to do politically. And his vote of no was almost seen as an act of treason because of the popularity of George Washington at the time. So he said, the heck with it, didn't have a legislative personality, didn't play well with others, didn't vote to thank George Washington, got, you know, kind of condemned for that, went back to the plantation. Okay? Well, he stayed home, and in 1798, in 1798, he became a circuit judge in Tennessee. In 1798, he became a circuit judge in Tennessee. What? Circuit would be C-I-R-C-U-I-T. Now, what's a circuit judge? We talked about this with the Judiciary Act. We had so many circuit district. So he was one of these 13 circuit judges, although there are more than 13 now, but he was the circuit judge for the state of Tennessee. Remember, every time a state got into the Union, did they give them a circuit court? Sure they did. He was the head of them. Okay? And he did very well, and the people really became fond of him. Very fond of him. I'll tell you one more story, write down what you want, but this tells you a little bit of about his personality. So, he's a circuit judge. A local man was arrested by a local sheriff, and he resisted arrest. He was resisting arrest. He wouldn't be arrested. Sheriff tried to arrest him. He wouldn't be arrested. Jackson heard about this, and even though he's not a law enforcement officer, he's a judge, he takes the law into his own hands, and he confronts this resistor with a loaded pistol, points it right at him. Said, "You will be arrested." This is a circuit judge. This isn't an officer, a sheriff, right? And listen to this quote. This guy surrendered immediately, and he said this, quote, "I looked at Jackson, and there was shoot in his eyes." What'd that tell you? He knew the guy was going to shoot him. I looked at Jackson, there was shoot in his eyes. He said, okay, I'm arrested. That's the type of guy he was. Did he really have any authority to do that? No. No, but by God, he was mad because that guy resisted arrest and the sheriff, and he just didn't put up with that. Now, what we'll do is we'll tell you this, and you know part of this, that because of his popularity, they're going to make him Major General, remember, of the Tennessee Militia, which is going to lead him where eventually? To New Orleans. And we'll finish the story tomorrow. Okay? Major General of the Tennessee Militia. He was a character, folks. A character. There's better to come, too.